be setting up agricultural credits and development funds in order to revive the country's agricultural economy and address the pervasive and abject poverty of rural communities. When it comes to democracy and prosperity, the regime's actions speak louder than their words. Only the tone deaf among the Burma watchers and pro-election campaigners can and do fail to take notice of a wide discrepancy between the regime's words and deeds. Several months ago, within 1 week after the successful completion of the seminars in Naypyidaw on poverty alleviation and rural development, led by the economist Joseph Stiglitz and organized by the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, or ESCAP, the regime reportedly spent $600 million on the purchase of MiG-29 fighter jets from Russia. A few days ago, the UN Human Rights Envoy, Thomas O'Hara Quintana, who returned from Burma this weekend, had this to say about the promised election in Burma, and I quote, "Without full participation, including the almost 2,200 prisoners of conscience, and an environment that allows people and parties to engage in the range of electoral activities, the elections will not be credible." Unquote. Rights violations and systematic political repression are not confined to the heartland of Burma. The day after the UN Human Rights Envoy's arrival in Burma last week, Amnesty International released a 58-page report highlighting the continuing systematic political repression in predominantly minority regions. Understanding how the regime attempts to play pro-democratic change elements at home and abroad requires adopting a big-picture perspective while remaining attentive to seemingly isolated political events across the country. The tactical moves that Senior General Than Shwe has employed since coming to power nearly 20 years ago include well-publicized and well-timed prisoner releases, facilitating important foreign visitors such as UN Human Rights envoys to visit prisons in far-flung places, permitting UN officials and senior Western diplomats and politicians to meet with jailed or detained prominent dissidents, most specifically Daw Aung San Suu Kyi, issuing strategically placed foreigners such as Joseph Stiglitz and prominent Burmese expatriates entry visas and giving them VIP treatment, playing different Western governments such as EU or the United States and organizations against one another, and so on and so forth. Fortunately, the NLD leadership sees through the fog of regime deception when it calls for the release of all political prisoners, not just NLD members. Considering that Burma has a total of more than 2,200 political prisoners who are being released at an excruciatingly slow rate of 20 to 30 a year, Than Shwe's regime, as well as the next generation of military rulers, can keep on using this strategy of prisoners as bargaining chips or public relation tools well into the 22nd century. Under this situation, the election, which is only a political event, allows for absolutely no meaningful cooperation and partnership between the military and the rest of the society. On their part, most Burmese know the polls do not represent the progress, for they will be held in accordance with the Constitution, which is meant to legalize the prerogatives of the military, as well as the supreme political role for the generals. No Burmese dissident or ordinary citizen in their right mind is clamoring for an ideal-typed democratic process. Half-century of life under military dictatorships has made the bulk of the population politically realists already. We don't need unsolicited and patronizing external advice on how to be politically pragmatic. To us, the 2010 election is old wine in a new bottle. The crucial issue here is that democratic change in Burma is not about the falsely constructed binary opposition between normative expectations versus pragmatic considerations regarding the anticipated electoral process. Democratic values and practical and immediate interests of the electorate in Burma are not mutually exclusive. In fact, pragmatism is not devoid of norms. The current system of despotic rule under Than Shwe displays ideological elements and governmental practices which can only be described as neo-fascist and neo-totalitarian, in that only one national vision is acceptable to the ruling military junta, and only one national institution is constitutionally entitled to rule the country. Pragmatism, in the face of such neo-fascism and neo-totalitarianism, all but amounts to collaboration. Historically and contemporaneously, there have always been individuals and social and economic organizations in any political and economic contexts which come up with intellectual or ideological justifications for their complicity in maintaining tyrannical regimes, wittingly or unwittingly. Pre-election Burmese elite are no exception here. To paraphrase the 18th century conservative British politician Edmund Burke, evil triumphs when good men and women fail to speak truth to power. It may not be enough to simply speak truth to power and curse the darkness, but it still is absolutely imperative that pro-change individuals speak out and curse the darkness first and foremost. What then is my suggestion for a way forward beyond cursing the darkness in Than Shwe's Burma? I advocate strategic engagement which is evolutionary in nature but is deeply sensitive to and capable of seizing revolutionary moments on the ground in order to usher in a new era of genuinely democratic change. Beyond Than Shwe's promised election this year, supporters of change in Burma should embrace strategic engagement with civil society and potentially reformist elements in the state bureaucracy and even within the military. This type of strategic engagement will lead to the gradual emergence of alternative centers of power, economic, societal, intellectual, and eventually political. As opposed to ASEAN's constructive engagement, the strategic engagement I advocate is change-driven and puts resources and ideas at the disposal of local communities and their allied international organizations. As a Burmese exile who lived under the first military regime for 25 years and a professional student who has studied the Burmese military rule as an institution for the past 20 years, I have greater confidence in the people to instigate genuine reform than the military control electoral process. The Nagas Constitution and the 2010 elections may be the only game in town, but the NLD and the public are not required to play the game. Under the grinding wheel of history, the country's feudal, colonial, fascist and military regimes of the past, including Ne Win's 26-year disastrous rule, have all vanished. Than Shwe's disciplined, flourishing democracy will in due course also be buried in his neo-fascist capital known as the abode of the kings. We Burmese may not be known as capable nation builders, but we certainly are capable of bearing tyrannies, foreign and domestic. That's the start.